Fictional stories are written by real people who leave fingerprints on their narratives pointing to the human condition. But today, I'd like to discuss some real stories I've found learning database management with a historical collection of Scottish witch trials. Let me start with Janet Cock. Janet was accused of witchcraft in 1661. She supposedly summoned devils and assisted another witch in folk healing ceremonies transferring diseases from human children to animals. Janet was tried and acquitted, but then tried again a month later and found guilty. She was executed by strangling and burning. This is tragic, not just because Janet had a husband and two daughters, but also because, if you don't mind me saying, witches don't actually exist. Maybe, in theory, Janet did participate in placebo folk healing ceremonies, but I highly doubt she literally summoned the devil. Janet died for basically no reason. The fiction of witches manifested real-life consequences. When fiction affects existence like this, it shows that the line between fantasy and reality is really what we make of it. So here's what I've made for my graduate class. This is a conceptual model. I don't want to bore you with in-depth terminology, but each of these boxes represents a spreadsheet, basically. Each person accused of witchcraft gets their own row in the accused table, with rather sparse information. Back in the 1600s, someone might not know their own birthday or birth year, so there are a lot of guesses. Each accused person has exactly one case, and, like Janet Cock, each case might have multiple trials. Cases and trials can relate to supposed demonic possessions or tortures applied to the accused, or a host of other events. By following an accused person's primary key to other tables, we can see what happened to them throughout their ordeals. I've heard one person dying is a tragedy, but 1,000 people dying is statistics. Seeing years of traumatic events from a bird's-eye view brings us closer to the data, but abstracts it until people look like ants. For Janet Cock, these accusations dominated her life until the end of her life, but looking at the conceptual model, she's just another pinball in a complicated machine. On the other hand, without these historical records, I probably wouldn't know anything about Janet at all. She wouldn't just be a pinball, she'd be a silenced pinball. Data science can be dehumanizing, but only because it shows so much of the human condition from so far away. The data itself doesn't reflect humanity. Humans observing the data manifest the human condition inside them through their understanding. So let's manifest. Plenty of supposed witches apparently weren't actually accused by anyone during their trial, but out of curiosity, I wanted to see who was accused by the most people at once. In 1645, poor Helen Clerk was accused by 12 women and 48 men for a total of 60 accusers. Have you ever tried to convince 60 people of anything? How about convincing even 6 people that they were wrong about you? Helen was probably about 50 years old and was married to a fisherman. She had a son and daughter. 20 years before the trial, she was supposedly cured of disease by another woman, Elspeth, a spae wife or fortune teller, who was later burnt for witchcraft. Perhaps Helen was inspired by Elspeth when her son, a boatman, ran into trouble on the dock. Other boatmen refused to pay their debts, and the boats they made were poor quality, claimed Helen. She even cursed a man who wouldn't marry her daughter. So when a storm racked a New Haven harbor, Helen was a suspect. She was investigated by a witch pricker on at least 2 occasions, which I can only imagine adds legitimacy to the idea that Helen caused the storm. Helen was investigated and held in prison for 2 years until her trial before 3 prosecutors with 1 defense advocate. Helen never confessed, but aside from that, as sad as I am to say it, I can't figure out what happened to Helen Clerk from the database. There's no record of her verdict, sentence, or execution. We can only hope her 60 accusers had to swallow their loss and Helen made it back home to her family. But even if she did, she lost 2 years of her life to something which is literally impossible. I will go on a limb and say Helen Clark did not cause that storm. I will even speculate that if Elspeth the Spaewife did have a role in curing Helen of disease, it was accomplished through non-supernatural means. However, 60 people at least seemed to be convinced otherwise, enough to contribute toward pushing Helen toward a fiery fate. I don't want to pretend I actually know anything about witches, or Scotland, or history, or any of the overlaps between. But I do have access to this neat database, which at least purports to give me a glimpse of events which happened hundreds of years before I was born. If you're one of my, 7 subscribers, you might know that I'm practicing making 360-degree video. After experimenting with 360 footage, I had a dream that my eyes were on opposite sides of my head. I could see in 360 myself. It didn't look equirectangular or any other way of representing 360 footage for our incapable eyes. It really seemed like I was looking in all directions at once in a way I could never describe in words. Except that I feel the same way when I look at this database, and databases in general. Through data science, we can perceive the world in ways never before possible. Someone trying to make this database in the 1700s would have had a pretty hard time of it, and their final product would be a nearly incomprehensible collection of books instead of an only kind of incomprehensible computer program. Perhaps in the future, the way we collect data will make us feel omniscient, like looking at God's notebook. Or maybe I'm thinking about it too much? That's all I do here at Thinkster. I'm sure other people have explored this database far more thoroughly than I have, but I had fun learning SQL while learning about witches, and I encourage you to do the same. I put this link in the description, so check it out. And subscribe. This video was a little academic, but next time I'll probably be back to rambling about anime again. Bye-bye!